Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. The free city of Lice reminded Harry of Braavos. The people here respected wealth and trade, just like in Braavos, but slavery was practiced in Lice, and like everything else, it was a lucrative business. However, slave labor was rare in Lice. In Lice, the aspects of slavery were focused on pillow houses and the palaces of wealthy merchants and magisters where they kept their bed slaves in collars. Unlike other free cities, they did not breed slave warriors. If they wanted warriors, they brought the unsullied or hired sellsword companies to fight in their name. Even slavery was used to increase the aesthetics of living. Lycian were one of the most beautiful folks Harry had come across. In this city, the blood of Valyria flowed far stronger than the other daughters of Valyria. Pentos, Mare, and Tyros had too much Andal blood in them. While Volantis hosted great families with roots in Valyria, they hid behind the Black Wall. In Lice, there was no such haughtiness on full display. Almost everyone Harry had seen on the street sported silver hair and lilac eyes. Some dyed their hair green or purple for some reason, but watching them walk the street was fun. Most of the Lycian people were light-skinned, with an almost ethereal quality to them, and the blood Valyria ran strong in their veins. They dressed scandalously compared to the prudish ways of Westerosi ways. Harry, of course, appreciated the Lycian fashion, mainly when Alanara chose to slip into a low-cut blue dress with a plunging neckline and a lot of slits on her skirt. Lice also hosted many different fashions and some of the best artisans, while his brothers were out on the street seeing the sights, enjoying the food, seeing plays, and whatnot. Harry was out there buying some of the works of the artisans. The many murals he had seen in Lice lit his eyes with greed. Such artistic talent made him immensely jealous of the Lycian. He also liked their colorful dyes, so he bought as much as he wanted. There were even some finely engraved pots and silverware that attracted his interest. Lice was also home to some of the best shipyards in the world after Braavos. While Braavos' ships focused on their functionality, the Lice's ships made them look more aesthetically pleasing. The many carracks and cogs he had seen at their harbors looked stylish, and frankly, he was starting to develop a love for giant stylish ships. He didn't know why, but looking at a row of Lycian carracks lining up in a harbor was pleasing. He liked to see such carracks and cogs line up on the harbor of Avalon. At first, Harry thought of approaching the magisters of Lice and buying out their ships from the harbor. But he had little to no business interest in Lice. At least, he had no direct trade with the Lycian people. Things might change in the future, but for now, no northern ships sailed this far. Their current interests lie in the Narrow Sea and the Sunset Sea. He was also reminded of the risk of sending his people into Lycing to sail the carracks and cogs from Lice. The stepstones were in the way, and he was nowhere strong enough to project his naval power this far. This made safely sailing any ships he bought from Lice to the north difficult. Seeing all the finest sculptures, murals, metalworks, and even shipbuilding made him immensely jealous of the city. To make matters worse, such artistic flavor thrived in a city that practiced slavery, which made him mad. He disliked that the Lycian projected more artistic and cultural freedom than the supposed land of the free in Westeros. Even worse, he felt that the North came up short compared with Lice, and that status was unacceptable to Harry. After seeing all the different free cities had to offer, he was adamant about making Avalon the bastion of art, fashion, and culture. To that end, Harry went on a poaching spree across the city to Arianne's amusement. He went after artisans, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, carpenters, dye makers, and even cooks. He offered them land and gold in exchange for their immediate relocation to Avalon and a steady income to serve his interests. Of course, some people to whom he made this offer outright rejected him or looked at him as if he were mad. The entire incident made Alanara laugh so hard. His latest attempt to hire a stellar craftsman nearly resulted in him being chased out of the man's shop, which caused Alanara to break out in peals of laughter. "Why are they refusing my offer?" Harry said in frustration. "Maybe because they don't know who you are, or they're under the impression that you're a slaver out to get them." At his affronted look, Alanara gave him a placating smile. "See this from their perspective. You came one day into their life, offering gold and silver in a faraway land for their skills. Why should they believe you? It's not as if most of these people have even heard of the North." "You knew," Harry grumbled. Only because the matron of the pillow house told me beforehand. Otherwise, I'd have been as ignorant as these people. Harry frowned thoughtfully as he walked back towards their manse. He supposed the disadvantage of his people not reaching this far for trade kept them unknown to most of these people. Unfortunately, the general Westerosi tag didn't help him much in lice, where ordinary men and women had little to no knowledge about the different polities of Westeros. So, the next best option in his hand was to buy skilled slaves, which was easier said than done. He'd have to approach the slave masters and look for quality products. It made him feel icky to even think about buying people like cattle even though they were muggles, so he went with the lesser evil. He tracked down some of the best slave masters in the city and put them under the Imperious curse. He turned the consolidated slave industry of lice against its interests. He had the slave masters do his bidding free of cost. The slave masters used their resources to pick the best workers from a wide variety of professions. But he kept the numbers low as he didn't want any questions to be raised when he left Lice. Besides, he only wanted enough people to train his people in Avalon. Harry went the extra mile and stole some designs of carracks and cogs for good measure. Throughout all that, Atalanta remained by his side with an amused smirk on her lips. "What?" he snapped. "Oh, nothing. I was wondering when you'd start acting your age, and now I have seen it with my own eyes," she said with a chuckle. "What do you mean?" Harry asked, feeling offended that he was being insulted by the woman who shared his bed. "Oh, come on. You found something you liked, and you took it with force," Alanara said, her lilac eyes dancing with mirth. "You don't know what you're talking, woman," Harry huffed, miffed at being compared to a kleptomaniac or a stubborn child. Sure, he was jealous of lights at beautiful ships, but he saved those slaves from being taken for granted. At Avalon, their work would be valued and compensated. They could live free and raise their families without the threat of chains. He considered his actions to be those of a brave liberator. After all, he had given these former slaves the best lodgings in the Liberator. Few could claim to fly in a ship and sail among the clouds, least of all slaves from Lycian. "Don't I?" Alanara giggled, hugging him from behind as they watched the newly liberated slaves of Lice being led to the Liberator. The free city of Lice slumbered in the night, ignorant that he was stealing away some of their skilled workers. They'll have a better life in the north than they could ever have in this city. Their children will be born free. Harry argued. "Freedom?" Alanara snorted. "You think all slaves yearn for freedom?" "You did." Harry frowned when he felt her stiffen, but she relaxed when he placed his palm over hers. "I did, but not everyone is like me. Some fear the uncertainty that freedom brings. Some slaves revel in the certainty of their fate. I've seen it." Alanara stared into the distance unseeingly. "Everything is uncertain in life. Only death is certain," said Harry, silently adding, "For most, all men must die." Alazira parroted the popular Brivusi phrase with a nod. "But I'm a woman. What'll be my life like in Avalon? What am I to do once you take a wife and have a family of your own? You should know by now that I don't abandon those who are mine. No matter their social standing, I'll go to any lengths to those loyal to me. What is my worth compared to a Dornish princess or a noble lady of the north?" Harry turned around in Alatara's arms to look at her. He frowned, noticing she was sporting a self-deprecating smile. "Do you think me so cruel to abandon you, Asanera? If I had wanted to bed you and throw you away, I'd have done so with Tyrech." Harry's eyes blazed with fury at the insinuation that he was using her. "Forgive me." Alanara bowed her head low. "I forgot myself." Harry calmed down, reining in his magic, which had slipped out of his control, into an oppressive aura that pressed down around him. "It's true that I cannot marry you and give you my name. I could, but doing so would make matters more difficult for you. But don't think for a moment that your social standing is based on the past. You're blessed with magic, a trait that raises you far more in standing than even the noblest of houses in my eyes," said Harry. With a flick of his finger, a globe of white light hovered around the palm of his hand. "You have the power to move heaven and earth in your soul." The globe of light transformed into fire, water, stone, and then dissipated into gentle gales which swept Alanera's silver hair behind her shoulders. "At Avalon, you will be revered for your gifts. But if you're so concerned, then let me promise you this. You won't be leaving my side." "How odds here?" he asked, peering at him with a pinch of hope in her eyes. "You said yourself that you're required to marry a noble woman. To carry the Stark name, yes. But nothing forbids me from granting you protection or a dignified life by my side," said Harry, pressing a chaste kiss on her cheek. "How can I stay by your side when you're married to another woman?" Alanara asked skeptically. "That's easy," Harry smirked. "You become a Valkyrie?" "It feels wrong," Alanara muttered. "If that is not to your liking, there are other options," said Harry. He led his Tyrosi lover to a warded cabinet in the Liberator. When he magically unlocked the door and held it open for her, he watched Alanira's eyes widen enough to pop out of her sockets. The cabin was overflowing with gold, gems, and pearls, illuminating it with an eerie golden glow. He picked up a random necklace of gold and blue gemstones and tied it around Atsanira's neck. "A portion of this wealth is yours. In Avalon, you can make a life of your own on your own terms. There is enough wealth for a dozen generations to live lavishly. You can find a husband of your liking and lead a peaceful life," Harry offered. Aletta remained rooted to the spot in silence as her companion slipped his hand around her waist and hugged her from behind. "As I said, I'll not abandon you, Axenger," Harry whispered. "You're free to choose your destiny." Aegon Targaryen stared out into the sea, his blue hair swept back as gales of wind swept by his resting spot. If he looked west, dunes of sand lay before him as far as his eyes could see. If he looked east, he could see the towering walls of Sunspear, the home of his deceased mother. To his south lay the summer sea, where ships from Essos, the Summer Islands, and Westeros prowled aplenty. If the gods had been kind, he'd have been the crown prince of Westeros, a scion of the Targaryen dynasty. But a stag now occupied his rightful throne, and his ancestral seat of Dragonstone remained far out of his reach. Still, he was far closer to his inheritance than he had ever been in the past. After all, he rested his head on a silk bed inside the halls of his mother's family instead of the wooden floor of the shy maid in the road. He was no longer a simple boy acting as a helping hand to Griff. He was now a squire to the Red Viper, and in time, he hoped to become the king of the Seven Kingdoms like his ancestor. But the path ahead was one of strife, war, and death. Unlike his namesake, he had no dragon to subjugate the continent. Therefore, he needed allies, a massive army, ships, and lots of gold. The enemy was no slouch. Even though the usurper died in the Lannister rebellion, the usurper's brother was just as dangerous. The Lannisters were decimated in the war, and now only a few remained. Just thinking about Tywin Lannister's demise brought a smile to his face. While he rejoiced at the fall of House Lannister, his pragmatic mind also reminded him that it brought forth the two great adversaries to his goals. House Baratheon was now far more dangerous under the reign of Stannis Baratheon than Robert. The crown now possessed the wealth of House Lannister in the palm of their hands. They could hire all sellsword companies of Essos should war break out again. Stannis' queen was also a dangerous woman who brought much strength to her husband. Saxel Florent was now the Lord of Lannisport and maintained a portion of the royal fleet in the city harbor. House Florent was also well connected in the Reach with blood ties to the great houses like Hightower. Much of the northern parts of the Reach were decimated by the disastrous war unleashed by the Lions, while the Florents remained untouched. There was tension in the Reach, but he couldn't possibly predict how the Reachmen would react when he raised the Targaryen banner. The second dangerous foe was House Stark. Their rise in power was unprecedented, almost akin to the rise of House Veteran under the Sea Snake. But House Veteran's holdings were a pittance compared to the wealth and power the North accumulated in less than a decade. The Starks now projected their strength across the Sunset Sea and the Narrow Sea. The sheer power possessed by Arianne Stark disturbed him. Sailors from the east had brought word to Doran about the burning of Myr. Aegon couldn't help but shiver at the reminder of Myr's fate. According to the Spider, House Stark's hold on the Seven Kingdoms was such their entire plan to take the Iron Throne hinged on keeping the North neutral at best. For this reason, his uncle was intent on cultivating blood ties with House Stark. His cousin, Princess Arianne, was offered as a bride to Arianne Stark. It was a significant risk Prince Doran was taking by handing over his heir to the North. The political ramifications of having a northern-influenced dynasty in Sunspear were not lost on Aegon either. However, their situation was such that they had to ensure the North remained above the neck no matter what happened in the southern kingdoms. If the North sided with them, it'd be a great boon for his cause, but Aegon was not sure the honorable Eddard Stark would betray his foster brother's family that easily. It was still uncertain whether the betrothal would be accepted, but Aegon hoped it would happen. The Starks were too powerful to ignore, and he'd have no chance of realistically winning the throne if they came to support Stannis Baratheon. Sir Jon, his father's trusted friend, was unhappy with the whole plan. But even Sir Jon saw the necessity of keeping the Starks content in the north. Despite what anyone else thought, Aegon thought House Stark had enough reasons to rebel. The gruesome deaths of Rickard Stark, Brandon Stark, and Lyanna Stark made Aegon feel sympathetic to their cause. He could understand why Aegon Stark would break his oaths and raise his banners against Aerys. After all, Aegon was in a similar position. His mother and sister were brutally murdered, and the Baratheons benefited from their murder. Even if Tywin was dead, Aegon saw the presence of a Baratheon on the Iron Throne as an insult to the memories of Elia Martell and Rhaenys Targaryen. He was no hypocrite to deny justice to the Starks and would never demand blind obedience like Ser Connington. Besides, Aegon thought blood ties with House Stark would go a long way in restoring trust with their old allies. As someone who studied the history of the Targaryen kings of the past, he knew House Stark was one of their least bothersome wardens. The North was the only region where his ancestors had never faced rebellion. The Starks had kept the Northmen loyal to the Iron Throne and the King's peace. They were also the least bit interested in the affairs of the South. Historically, the Northmen were comfortable staying behind the neck. His father and grandfather wronged the North and attracted their ire. If Princess Arianne's marriage to Lord Arianne could put aside the bad blood between their houses, he would be thankful to the gods. His duty as king was also to ensure the realm remained at peace. He hoped peace could be restored between the two houses. If House Martell and Targaryen could put behind the bad blood, then he hoped that House Stark could become a trusted ally in the future. However, his concerns were not solely focused on House Stark. Gaining the allegiance of the great houses of the Reach was a vital part of their plan. But even if they somehow gained House Tyrell's support, the threat of the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and the Vale remained at large. Doran's army could keep the Stormlanders engaged, but Stannis Baratheon was not without allies. Earlier, the Vale was their greatest concern after the North, but now the Riverlands were becoming too powerful. House Tully now held blood ties with the Vale, the North, and the Westerlands. Houses Stark, Arryn, and Lefford were now tied to House Tully through marriage. As strong as the Dornish army was, Aegon held no notions that his mother's homeland could defeat the combined might of all these kingdoms. At times like these, he thought of his family's dragons. It was a vain hope to hold on to such thoughts, but he wondered how it must have felt to be among the clouds. Indeed, his kinsmen of old must have felt like gods, being one step closer to heaven. Suddenly, a large shadow fell upon him, making Aegon look up. His eyes widened as he saw a massive ship hovering in the sky, defying all natural laws. He gazed at the enormous ship in the sky in awe and watched as it sailed past him gracefully. He shook himself out of the stupor and immediately rushed towards the Dornish steed gifted by his uncle. Hastily climbing aboard his mount, he urged the creature to ride as fast as possible towards Sunspear. While Sir Jon was paranoid enough to want him farther away from the Starks, Aegon was unwilling to let this opportunity pass. Not since Doran the young dragon has anyone defeated a polity at the ripe age of 10 and 4. Arianne Stark had decimated a free city, bringing the city to its knees in a single night. He wanted to meet such a person, and hopefully he could strike up a friendship with such a powerful lord. During his reign, he hoped to bring the North to the fold and address the crimes his father and grandfather committed. If I'm to be the king of these 7 kingdoms, then I need to bring lasting peace and acknowledge the wrongs committed by my family. Aegon thought as he rode towards Sunspear to meet one of the most powerful sorcerers in the known world. Arianne could hardly contain her glee upon seeing the massive ship floating high above the walls of Sunspear. The sheer presence of the flying ship was cathartic. Looking around, she noticed she was not the only one, the euphoria of seeing something impossible unravel before her eyes. The Targaryens of old had the same effect with their mastery of their dragons. As riders of such magnificent beasts, they inspired awe, power, and fear among all who laid their eyes on those flying creatures. But Doran proved that Targaryen dragons were not invincible, and Aegon and his wives could be successfully repelled. Anything that breathed could be made to bleed, and anything that bled could die. Therefore, dragons were not invulnerable. It was just difficult to kill them. Looking upon the mighty warship that floated above their heads, Arianne wondered whether a lucky bolt could bring down this wooden beast like Meraxes. Her people had felled dragons and ships in the past, so she supposed this wooden beast while formidable, was still as vulnerable as Targaryen dragons of the past. At the same time, she had never heard about a single dragon destroying a whole city. The flying ship had done the impossible, bringing Myr to its knees in a single night. If the tales from Essos were to be trusted, Arianne Stark brought death and fire upon Myr for sending assassins against him and his brothers. Some tales claim he breathed fire upon the city like a vengeful god. More outlandish claims spoke of a fire that fell upon the city like rain and burned it all away in a single night. Arianne believed her prospective betrothed used his magic to burn the whole city down. After all, she was regaled by her uncle with tales of Arianne's exploits in the Westerlands. In Dorne, the tale of Lannisport's fall was sung by many bards, and they always heaped praises on the northern lord who smashed the city walls by summoning lightning to do his bidding. She only believed such tales because her uncle confirmed them. She sprung back into her chambers as she watched the ship lower to the ground outside Sunspear's walls. Thankfully, her friend and childhood companion Sylva Santiger was staying in her chamber with Tying. "He's here!" Arianne exclaimed excitedly as she ran straight for her wardrobe, searching for a fitting dress to catch the eye of her intended. "Who? The young Griff?" Sylva asked hopefully. "No, Sylva. The Starks have arrived." Arianne rolled her eyes at her friend's obsession with her uncle's Squire. Ever since Sylva came from Spotswood and met the young Griff, she had been smitten by the Tyroshi boy. Staring dreamily at the young Griff in the training yard, like some lovesick Reach girl, was now a hobby for her friend. Of course, her friend had tried many tricks to garner the attention of her uncle Squire with no luck. "I'll not fail like Sylva," Arianne thought as she put some scented oils on her body. Arianne glared at her cousin and friend. "Are you two going to help me, or are you just going to stay there gaping like idiots?" she asked, annoyed. Her two companions sprung into action and helped her look presentable to receive the Starks. "Do you think they came to discuss the betrothal?" Tyia asked. "It's possible," Arianne mumbled with a thoughtful frown. Arianne wondered that herself, but her father had remained tight-lipped about the whole affair, if there was any development. She desperately needed this to work, if only to retain her position as the heiress to Sunspear. The North was too far away from Dorne to give her the backing of a large army, should her father go ahead and declare Quentyn as heir. But Arianne Stark had proven that he did not need armies or fleets to destroy his enemies. Such power could undoubtedly secure her position. At the same time, she was aware the Starks also likely needed something if they agreed to the betrothal. What they needed was interesting, because if she knew what it was beforehand, she could easily promise it herself to secure Arianne Stark as her husband. That's where Nimriia comes in. Between the two of us, we should be able to dig deep into Arianne Stark's mind and desires, Arianne thought. "Where is Nimriia?" Arianne suddenly asked as Tying Sylva helped comb her hair. "She is probably outside the walls of Sunspear. I remember Nime saying something about finding a Summer Island merchant for some black henbane." Sylva shrugged. "I guess she'll rush back to the castle with that flying ship's arrival." Arianne muttered thoughtfully. "There is a flying ship?" Sylva squealed in excitement, while Tyun let out a gasp. Arianne could only roll her eyes at her friend and cousin. It was just like them to be utterly ignorant of what was happening right under their noses. "You two were singing songs behind closed doors so you couldn't hear the commotion created by the ship's arrival," said Arianne. Immediately, Tyden and Sylva started hounding her to see the infamous flying ship of House Stark. Arianne rolled her eyes and shored up her mind as her lady companions pestered her nonstop. Thankfully, she dressed accordingly to receive their northern guests in time. By the time she joined her father's side, she was dressed in the colors of her house. Her dress was a glittering yellow and orange, representing the orange sun and golden spear of House Martell's sigil. Her hair was down but neatly combed, and it went down her right shoulder. Gold bracelets gifted by her mother adorned her arms, while gold barrets and a circlet decorated her hair and head. "You look beautiful as ever, daughter," Doran complimented her. "Thank you, father," Arianne said, her eyes falling on her father, sitting in his wheeled chair. Oreo Hada stood guard beside them with a small number of guards. A bad case of gout had ridden her father's ability to walk, but he was a master manipulator with plans within plans. That was why she was wary of her father's current plans. She had been told of her father's initial plan to have her married off to Viserys Targaryen. At least that was the excuse her father gave her for rejecting all betrothal offers that came for her hand. She didn't know whether to believe that was the truth. She had seen his letter to Quentyn and knew that he planned to have her brother succeed as heir instead of her. But now her father was interested in having Arianne Stark as her husband. His plans to build an alliance with the exiled Targaryens were dismissed unceremoniously. She was not told the exact reasons, but then again, she didn't care for her father's reasons. Perhaps he thought tying their house to those mad dragons was idiotic. Or maybe her father had grown a spine and thought to break ties with their dragon oppressors. If her people were disliked in the rest of the Seven Kingdoms, then the Targaryens were hated with equal passion in Dorne. After all, the last of the Valyrian dragon lords had burned their people in their many attempts at conquest. Besides, any cause of revenge against the Lannisters was already fulfilled. All thanks to Arianne Stark. It was Arianne's hammer that caused the war between lions and stags. It was his aid that allowed the Dornish army to sack Lannisport. It was his attack that opened the doors of Casterly Rock. It was his words that led her uncle to have the honor of taking Tywin Lannister's head. The war had also claimed the lives of Amory Lorque and Gregor Clegane. The Lannisters lost their precious city to House Florent, and their precious gold was taken away upon their defeat. The seats of Castamere and Tarbeck Hall were taken away from Lannister control, confining them to their sole see of Casterly Rock. They even lost their precious Valyrian steel sword Lord Lannister had bought with an exorbitant amount of gold. Her father would be lucky to have such a good son who brought ruin upon House Lannister. Lately, she had heard murmurs of concern between her father and uncle when word reached Sunspear about what happened with Muir. Arianne only became determined to gain Arianne Stark as her husband. She now had conclusive proof that the Lord of Avalon had enough strength to support her position as the Princess of Dorne. Should the worst happen, with Arianne's support, even the Dornish lords inclined to support her brother would switch sides. Perhaps my own children could inherit such mighty powers to change the deserts of Dorne into sprawling farmlands that put the Reach to shame, Arianne thought. Her musing was cut short as their guests arrived at the Tower of Sun, escorted by Prince Oberyn and her cousin Nimriia. Her eyes lit up with interest as she saw Arianne Stark walking towards her and her father with his two brothers. "Welcome, Lord Arianne." "Lord Robb and Lord Jon," Doran said, dipping his head. Prince Doran, Arianne, and his brothers nodded. Arianne noticed Arianne had grown enough to be a few inches taller than her. "I gather your journey was comfortable," Doran said. "It was quite enjoyable," said Arianne with a roguish smirk. "Of course. Being so close to the heavens must be quite exquisite," Arianne said, grinning at the Starks. "There is that as well. I hope you haven't forgotten the promise you made the last time we met. Arianne, you promised me a ride in your airship." Arianne smiled sultrily at Arianne. "I haven't forgotten, Princess. I look forward to it then. But first, let us offer you guest rights," said Arianne, taking a tray from a servant and offering bread and salt to their guests. Arianne allowed their Stark guests to rest and refresh themselves. The servants prepared baths, placed the best of Dornish red in their chambers, and anything else they needed. Instead of bothering the Starks, she went straight at her cousin. "Did he say anything?" Arianne asked immediately after dragging Nimriia to a secluded chamber. "Say what?" Nimriia acted as if she knew nothing. "About about the betrothal," Arianne hissed. "Arianne and his brothers just arrived at our home. Why do you expect them to talk about this matter the moment they step in, Sunspear?" Arianne let out a frustrated growl as she paced back and forth in the room. Unfortunately, Nime made sense, but that didn't mean she liked it one bit. The offer has been sent for nearly a year. The Lord of Winterfell has yet to respond with a rejection or approval. Arianne growled. "Then that means you still have a chance. All we have to do is convince Arianne," Nimriia pointed out. "I suppose I do," Arianne thought as she spun plan upon plan in her mind. Harry stared out of the sprawling chamber he was afforded in the Tower of the Sun. Through the window, he could see a dormant-shaped keep of Sunspear, which was supposedly the old palace of House Martell before the arrival of the Rhoynar. He counted 6 towers, all made with the classic Rhoynish architectural style. The domed tops of the towers gleamed under the hot Dornish sun. The desert lay to the west, and the sea lay to the east. This was the first time Harry had seen a desert in this world, and he disliked it. The air was dry and hot, forcing Harry to constantly urge himself to stay in a tub of water and never leave it. He was also sweating, and water was leaving his body like a melting glacier. The weather became unbearable, forcing Harry to use some cooling charms to stave off the heat from the desert. Luckily, he also had access to ice, so he drank lots of iced wine and water to stave off his need to get the hell out of Dorne. Having felt a small piece of what life was like in Dorne, he was rethinking his plans for this place. Dorne's strategic position attracted him to it. It controlled all trade routes to the Reach and the Westerlands through the sea, and those who commanded the Summer Sea controlled the trade in the Reach and the Westerlands. Having a friendly state in Dorne was vital to the expansion of Avalon's trade reach, especially if he wanted more access to Lice of Atlantis and, most importantly, the Summer Isles. Dorne was also a polity of some importance, and as he could see, there was a chance that the principality could rebel and break off from the Iron Throne's authority. There was a lukewarm hope as the presence of Aegon Targaryen complicated such matters, but war often called kings on the battlefield, and he had no reason to doubt the same wouldn't happen to Aegon. He still had his doubts about whether this Aegon Targaryen was authentic, not that it mattered in the least. Fake or the real deal, Aegon Targaryen would not rule the North, but securing a friendly Dorne was necessary to wipe out the dominion of the Redwyne and Hightower fleets from the Summer Sea. The dominance of Old Town and Arbor threatened his interests in the region. He had briefly considered securing the Reach, but that place was the center of all southern politics and the faith of the Seven. The advantages of gaining the allies in the Reach were overshadowed by the disadvantages it posed in the long run. Besides, the lessons of the history of that region ensured he never took them lightly. The Targaryen dynasty became a shadow of itself when the Hightowers married into the family of Dragon Lords. The Hightowers also had a monopoly on knowledge and religion through the Citadel and the Starry Septon. They were his obvious contenders, not his allies. Dorne, despite its unattractive geography, offered him a better alternative. He coveted the strategic locations of their ports, and most importantly, Princess Arianne offered him control of Dorne. If he married her, he would become the consort of the Princess of Dorne. With his vast fleet and Dorne's unique position in the sea trade routes, a massive naval empire could be born. He had already knocked down the Ironborn and the Lannisters as a first step in his plan to dominate the seas. The second blow ought to crush the Ironborn for good, and then he could focus on the Erebor and Old Town. Even now, Princess Arianne or Nimriia remained ignorant about the true plans of Prince Doran and Oberyn. That was why he was taking a bland approach with the Dornish princess. He showed enough interest in them to keep Prince Doran interested, but not too much to make them suspicious. For once, his father's inability to say a blanket no to anyone sending a request worked wonders for his plans regarding Doran. His musings were cut short when he heard a knock on the door. He unlocked the door magically and had it swing open. He was hardly surprised to see Nimriia waiting outside. She was dressed in a loose cream dress that barely covered most of her body. "Enjoying the view, are we?" Nimriia asked as she stepped into his chamber. "It's interesting to see Rosenish architecture. I have visited Gozia and Dro, and seen little that was left of the Rosenier. This is much better," said Harry, nodding at the beautifully constructed domes. "Did you cross the Rhone and visit the other ancient cities of the Rhinar?" Nimriia asked as she stood close to him, observing the magnificent towers of Sunspear. "No, Gozia and Droshu was the only Rosiern city we visited." "In that case, it'll be my pleasure to show you all my people have to offer, Lord Stark," Nimriia said coyly, batting her eyelashes at him with a playful grin. "Lead the way, O noble sand snake." Harry returned the grin and offered his arm. They walked out of his chamber hand in hand. "We should collect my siblings along the way," said Harry once they were out of the chamber. "Taiyang has already escorted them out of their chambers," said Nimriia. "Tien? She's your younger sister, isn't she? The one with the blonde hair?" Harry inquired as they leisurely walked down the spiraling staircase to the bottom of the Tower of the Sun. Yes. Why?" "Interested in Taiyang?" Nimriia teased. "How could anyone else interest me when a fine, cultured lady such as yourself is by my side?" Harry smirked roguishly. "I was asking for the sake of my brothers. The reputation of the Sand Snakes is well known in the Seven Kingdoms. Taxian is a sweet girl. She's a septa, you know. All the more reason to worry for my brothers. You see, they don't follow the Seven. Then you're in luck. Taiyuna will cleanse your brothers of their sins and lead them on the righteous path," Nimriia declared with a flourish. "And where would this righteous path take my brothers?" Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. "If they're lucky, they might end up in my sister's bed." "If they're unlucky?" Harry asked, dismissing the blatant admission that the Sand Snakes were out to seduce his brothers. "If they're unlucky," Nimriia trailed off as she paused upon seeing the sight in the training yard. "They'll end up in the training yard playing at being knights." Harry also came upon the sight that gave Nimriia pause. He watched stoically as Jon and Robb were in the training yard, swords in their hands, facing off against a Dornish knight and Aegon Targaryen, blue hair. Harry mentioned inconspicuously, "Is he a Tyrosi?" Yes. I don't know his name. He goes by the name of the Young Griff. He is the son of a sellsword friend of my father. He squires for my father now. A student of the Red Viper? That'd make us brothers by the sword," Harry commented idly. "You two want to spend time in the training yard poking at each other with your swords, or do you want to spend the day with a beautiful woman, Stark?" "There is a beautiful woman here." "Where is she?" Harry made a show of looking around. "You've become better at warring with words. Oh, great Lord of Avalon, the mighty Wallbreaker." "Wallbreaker?" Harry amusedly asked. "That's what our people call you. After all, you brought down the walls of Landsport by summoning the might of the sky." "Huh, it's good to know that my deeds are appreciated in Dorne." "They are appreciated and celebrated, my lord." Another voice suddenly joined their conversation. Harry eyed the newcomer stoically. It was none other than Princess Arianne, and she looked more beautiful than she had been an hour earlier. Doran could not forget the hand which dealt a blow to the Lions of the West and sated Dorne's cry for vengeance. "You have my heartfelt thanks." Arianne came close to Harry and pressed a chaste kiss on his left cheek. Her lips lingered on his skin far longer than what was socially acceptable before she withdrew. He smelled a pleasing sandalwood scent on her body. It was a Norvoshi-scented oil he had also bought from Bravos. But smelling that on a voluptuous woman like Arianne was breathtaking and aesthetic. "So, do you want to spend time in that dusty yard, or do you want to spend time with us?" Nimriia asked with a raised brow, looking keenly at his face. A tour of Sunspear by an infamous sand snake and the Princess of Dorne. How could anyone refuse such an offer? "Please, lead the way, ladies." Even as he said that, while happily walking together with Nimriia and Princess Arianne on either side, his eyes fell on Aegon and Jon. His mind was internally conflicted about whether he should tell Jon about his brother. His eyes lingered on the two youngsters' blue and black-haired heads until he turned a corner, and they disappeared from his view. But his dilemma lingered. Should I tell the truth to Jon? Arianne had never been this elated in the last couple of years. Even when the pimples on her face started disappearing and her body started flowering like a real woman's should, she hadn't been as delighted as was now. After all, how many people in the known world could claim that they sailed amongst the clouds? Arianne inhaled the twilight air of the Dornish sky, her eyes fixed on the sun's descent into the western sea. A soft orange glow enveloped the Dornish sky, casting the sands of Doe in a breathtaking palette of red and gold. But as the dunes of Dorne receded, a lush green landscape emerged, transforming her lands into tiny emerald patches visible from the Liberator. The people below, mere specks in the grandeur of the world, added to the sense of awe that filled her. It is no wonder the Targaryens considered themselves above all. From this height, everything below seems so petty, so inconsequential. The world, with all its grandeur and strife, is reduced to mere specks. Arianne marveled at the perspective she gleaned as she looked down upon Dorne from the sky. It also became more apparent why the Dragon Lords of Valyria were callous enough to wage war against the entire world and take everything for themselves. The world's riches might have looked ripe for taking when they gazed upon the world from the sky, just like she was feeling right now. Aboard the Liberator, she saw the world through a different eye. She could see how little Dorne was from this far high. Arianne started to wonder whether the same was true for Harry and Stark. After all, he had already brought an entire free city to the ground in a single night. That was something even House Targaryen, at the height of their power, couldn't do. "Is the view to your liking?" Arianne broke into a smile as she turned to smile at her companion on the deck of the Liberator. "Indeed it is, Arianne." Arianne reached out her hand and lopped it around his elbow. "I'm immensely grateful for the view. I don't believe I'll ever forget this. Dorne looks far more peaceful and beautiful from these heights." They both fell silent as winds howled in their ears as they watched the land below. Arianne felt like a divine being standing beside the strongest sorcerer by her side as she gazed upon the lands she was destined to rule. "Tell me about the North. How does it compare to Dorne?" Arianne asked, leaning against the arm of the Black Wolf of the North. "Well, there are no deserts in the North. Most of our lands are filled with forests, hills, grasslands, cliffs, swamps, mountains, rivers, and lakes. Snow covers the northernmost high mountains of the north. I have never seen snow, as you can see. I'm familiar with the hot Dornish sun, Arianne said coyly while rubbing her body against Arianne. You are most welcome to visit Avalon. House Stark would be honored to host the future Princess of Dorne amongst us. The North has never seen a Dornish princess, have they? Arianne asked curiously, wondering whether any of her ancestors ever visited the coldest kingdom of Westeros. No. Arianne nearly pouted at the stale answer. So, she switched the topic to something closer to Arianne's heart. Is it true that the Great Hall of Avalon has a lifelike imagery of the night sky painted with magic on the ceiling? Arianne asked curiously. Yes, but you'll have to see the enchanted ceiling with your own eyes. It cannot be described with mere words. Arianne saw a spark of passion in his eyes, which made her crow in delight in her mind. Oh, I believe you, Arianne grinned. 'Tis the same with the water gardens. You'll find it most appealing. Arianne glanced at her cousin out of the corner of her eyes. She could see Nimriia was engaged in an animated conversation with one of the infamous Valkyrie guards. The rumor was that these elite shield maidens were witches from the mysterious mountain clans of the north. She didn't know how much of it was the truth, but Nimriia knew them better than most. The Liberator hugged the coastline to reach the water gardens. All the while, Arianne struggled to broach the subject of the betrothal without looking too desperate or coming off as greedy. Whenever she worked up the courage to broach the subject, Arianne would look at her with his haunting, stormy gray eyes, and she'd flatter. It was not shyness that stayed her tongue, but the fear of failure. If she failed to convince Arianne of the merits of their union, she'd most likely end up with her father's incessant plots to keep her away from inheriting Sunspear. The water gardens were 3 leagues away from Sunspear. Throughout the journey, the question stewed in her mind until she decided to broach the subject inside the safe haven of the water gardens. Tell me, do you know about the history of the water gardens? How it came to be, and why? Arianne asked. I'm afraid not. Then let me tell you the tale of Meryn Martell and Daenerys Targaryen. It started with... Arianne started regaling the tale of the first Targaryen princess who married into her family and the unification of Dorne with the rest of the 7 kingdoms. Halfway through the tale, the water gardens became visible from the bow of the Liberator. The open courtyards of the water gardens showcased a splendor of greenery and flowers unlike any in Westeros. Even from this distance, Arianne was forced into silence as she gazed at the place where she spent most of her childhood. Seeing the sprawling courtyards and gardens from the sky took her breath away. There was almost an otherworldly feel when she gazed upon the grand structure despite knowing it all her life. But she wasn't the only one taken back by the beauty of the water gardens. Arianne was similarly stunned by the blue water pools in the open courtyards. Trust me, the view is much better up close, said Arianne. It didn't take long for the Liberator to land a few paces away from the teal-colored walls of the palace. Several Martell guards greeted them outside the palace walls. Once they stepped out of the Liberator, the guards were understandably shaken upon seeing a massive ship flying into the palace. But upon seeing Arianne, they stood down but didn't let go of their spears. Come, Arianne, let me show you the palace. Arianne joyfully dragged Arianne inside the palace to show off the grace and beauty of House Martell's private retreat. There were several pools inside the palace with blue and purple waters. The waters have color because she started. The pools have teal or purple painted bricks inside the water. Arianne finished before she could explain. Yes, you are familiar with pools? Arianne asked in surprise. Avalon also has pools. I have built a few of them since Prince Oberyn's visit. I see, Arianne said, vowing to glean more details about Avalon from Arianne. This place was once an oasis. Meryn Martell built the palace as a gift for his new Targaryen bride. It was Daenerys Targaryen who opened the pools for all children from Dorne. She took him to her favorite places in the palace, which included the sunflower garden, palm trees that provided shade to the pools, the ever-colorful plumeria, bat flowers that decorated the palace in a purple hue, and jasmines that filled the water gardens with their divine fragrance. There were children fostered in the water gardens from all walks of life, noble and small folk. They learned their numbers and letters in the morn while making everlasting friendships. Still, showcasing all that was in the water gardens still left Arianne in the lurch. She was still uncertain about how to broach the subject of the betrothal. As Arianne was making idle conversation with some of the children present among them, she went to Nimriia. Have you asked him? Nimriia asked in a hushed whisper. No, she whispered back. I'm struggling to decide how and when to broach the subject. He is more intimidating than last time. Arianne disliked admitting that, as it was akin to admitting defeat. But the truth was staring back at her face. The fear of rejection robbed her confidence whenever she prepared to bring up the subject of betrothal. The realization that Arianne could take any woman as wife and his powers or influence wouldn't diminish an iota was another blow to her confidence. Her prospects of becoming the Princess of Dorne were inconsequential to the power and influence already within the grasp of the Lord of Avalon. So her confidence dipped whenever she wanted to say what she wanted to say to Arianne. I told you not to dance around with him. He likes honesty more than anything else. Nimriia whispered back with a disappointed look. It's easy for you to say. You know him better. Arianne trailed off as she eyed her cousin and then Arianne. What? Nimriia asked with a raised eyebrow. You should talk to him, said Arianne. He'll listen to you. Talk? Why are we talking about anything at all? Then what do you suggest? You know him better than anyone. Arianne whispered back. We seduce him tonight, right here. Arianne's eyes widened before a playful glint entered her dark eyes as she looked at her cousin. Are you sure that'll work? Trust me, I do. Arianne might seem all serious and composed, but he is no different than most men with too much power in their hands. He has his vices, said Nimriia. In that case, we'll need to make an excuse to stay the night in the water gardens, Arianne whispered, regaining some confidence as she was working on something familiar. The usual political subterfuge and delicate plans were not her chosen weapon, but seducing men to do her bidding was her area of strength. She could work with that without doubting herself every step of the way. Leave that to me, Nimriia said before leaving Arianne's side, and leading Arianne to the beach side of the palace. Arianne watched them leave before she sprung to action. She hastily gathered the palace servants to make arrangements for their private quarters. Arianne grinned upon seeing the reflection in the mirror. She had changed into a silky silver Norvasy garb her mother had sent as a Namesday present. It just so happened that she kept most of the things she received from her mother in her chambers in the water gardens rather than sunspear. While she had kept everything that reminded her mother in the water gardens as a way to spite her father, it worked to her advantage in her time of need. You look quite beautiful, cousin, said Nimriia, watching her with a suave grin from the corner of the room. You look as radiant as ever, and Arianne returned the compliment, tracing her eyes along the delicate contours of her cousin's body and the sheer, silky, cream gown her cousin wore. Shall I invite Arianne for dinner? Arianne nodded and watched as Nimriia left her solar. She combed her hair one last time before exiting her room and stood beside the dinner table, hosting a fine spread. It was a small round table, fit 3 to dine freely. Candlelight bathed the table, and the pool nearby in its golden light. The starry night sky could be seen from the open courtyard from the table. The stars and half-crescent moon could be seen mirrored on the pool waters just 2 feet from the dinner table. The door swung open, admitting Nimriia and Arianne. The servants stationed outside knew to close the door and allow them the privacy needed. A special dinner with Nim and the Princess of Dorne. Will wonders never cease? Arianne commented offhandedly as he took a seat at the table. If you wish it, more wonders could be arranged. Nimriia said with a playful laugh as she sat down. Well, who am I to deny if you are offering? Arianne grinned at the two of them. In that case, we'll make this a night you won't forget, Arianne winked. Now, tell us about your adventures in Essos. I'm sure you have some interesting stories to share. Nimriia directed the conversation to something Arianne was also interested in. As they wined and dined, she listened closely to the tales from Arianne. Most of it sounded too fantastical, especially the part where Arianne claimed to have visited Valyria, but she supposed anything could be possible with a flying ship and a powerful sorcerer. They talked more than they ate, and Arianne had many interesting stories to share. Besides, the spread on the table was nothing fancy. The servants were unaware that they were visiting or staying the night, but a few delicacies like chicken and bacon were on the table with the Dornish red to wash it down. As their dinner table conversation dwindled, Nimriia was the one to make the first move. Arianne watched as her cousin left her seat and stood behind Arianne's chair with a playful grin. Nimriia threw her arms around Arianne from behind and pressed her wine-red lips against his left ear. Her cousin also conveniently pressed her ample bosom against the back of Arianne's head. I'm going for a swim. You're welcome to join me. Nimriia whispered throatily against Arianne's ear. Harry watched Jon dancing around the yard with a blunted sword, easily outpacing his opponent in speed and technique. But he had to admit the young Griff was no slouch either. The boy was lithe and well-trained, but held on to a rigid form that emphasized defense more than speed or maneuverability. Your brother has certainly inherited your father's skill with a blade. After all, Lord Eddard slayed the Sword of the Morning in single combat. Prince Doran commented, observing the sword fight in the yard with great interest. Father always said Arthur Dayne was the most formidable opponent he ever faced in single combat. Robb said politely, he was a great knight, Arthur Dayne. Prince Doran said calmly, a great knight who imprisoned a helpless girl in a tower in the middle of a desert while a madman raped her. Harry snorted. We have very different definitions for what constitutes greatness. He could see Robb shooting him a look that screamed, be polite. I see, Doran said calmly, while eyeing him with interest. My brother told me the people of the North are not keen on southern fables. It seems my brother was not wrong in that assessment. Fables are made by bards who have never witnessed anything with their own eyes. They like to romanticize the truth to make it appealing to their audience. So the Kingsguard of the Mad King remains dutiful knights instead of known as accomplices to the abduction, rape, and murder of a young girl. Prince Rhaegar remains a melancholic warrior who fought for his waning dynasty instead of being known as a rapist or as a man who started a disastrous war that robbed the lives of his wife and children, Harry said bluntly. There was a tangible, uncomfortable silence, and Harry could see the sellsword Griff grimace with gritted teeth upon retelling the supposedly eminent characters of the Targaryen loyalists. Despite that, the blue-haired Griff remained seated beside Prince Oberyn without uttering a word. As blunt as ever, Arianne. I like that in the Northerners. Prince Oberyn guffawed. The North also misses your colorful personality, Oberyn, Harry said, smiling at the younger Martell brother. I'm sure you enjoyed some of those colorful personalities quite intimately. Oberyn winked at him. Harry could hear a smatter of girlish giggling from behind him. He was acutely aware of the sand snakes standing behind him while Princess Arianne sat between her father and uncle. Robb also looked at him with a pointed look. But his twin hardly had any moral high ground, considering Robb had lost his virginity to a Pentoshi courtesan and went on to invite a Tyroshi courtesan into his bed as well. Harry was amused at himself for comparing Arianne and Nimriia with Pentoshi and Tyroshi courtesans. The consequences of such a scandal were far more far-reaching than Robb's or his own actions in Essos. He did not intend to turn his dalliances with Arianne and Nimriia into a scandal. He doubted House Martell would go to such an extent either. Despite the reputation of the Dornishmen, he doubted the Martells would want to disparage the reputation of their daughters. What do you think of my new student, Arianne? Oberyn asked, nodding at the blue-haired boy battling Jon. Honestly, I'm surprised he is your student, Harry commented airily. Oh, why is that? Oberyn raised an eyebrow. The lad is stiff and rigid in his form. It is as if he was trained by someone only familiar with training in plated armor. I'd wager a guess it was a stiff knight with no appreciation for using the body in flow with the sword. Harry answered honestly, you're not wrong. I only started training the young Griff recently. It's difficult to break habits gained from childhood that easily, Oberyn said. The young Griff, whoever named this poor lad, is an idiot, Harry said with a scoff. I couldn't agree more. It is a stupid name. Oberyn grinned widely, enjoying the way Jon Connington was squirming in his seat. Suddenly applause broke out as Jon disarmed the young Griff. Young Jon's skill with a blade is prodigious. No doubt, he is a credit to your family. Prince Doran complimented. Thank you, Prince Doran. We are very proud of our brother. Robb, ever the diplomat, graciously accepted the praise. How about you give some advice to my squire, Arianne? After all, you were my student once. Your knowledge of the sword and my own techniques might prove to be a valuable lesson to the young Griff. Oberyn suggested.
Is that necessary, Uncle? I'm sure Arianne has more important things to do than impart lessons to a Tyroshi boy.
Arianne peeked up. The way her eyes lingered on Harry made it clear to everyone what these important things she was talking about. After all, it was no secret that she had been handsy with Harry since they returned from the Water Gardens. Insatiable minx, Harry thought as he kept a poker face, while Arianne smiled sultrily at him without a care in the world. He could also see Prince Doran's calm mask drop slightly. Before anything could happen, he decided to intervene. I don't think it is much of a hassle, Harry said as he stood up from his seat. After all, this young Griff is a fellow student. It'd be remiss of me not to familiarize myself with another student of the Red Viper. It took him a few minutes to choose a balanced, blunted sword before he entered the training yard. Young Griff, you ready for another bout? He inquired as he stepped past John and faced the blue-haired boy. It'd be my honor, Lord Stark, the blue-haired boy said, looking a tad excited despite breathing heavily from the recent practice session with John. You can call me Arianne. With that, Harry swung the sword and started a spectacle of steel in the training yard. Harry splashed himself with more water in the bathtub, rubbing away the sweat and dirt from his body. This was one of the other reasons he disliked getting into a sword fight. He disliked getting all sweaty and dirty like a pig. It was good to keep his physique top-notch, but hardly useful in actual combat. When he could bring swift victory by thinking faster than his opponent, the charm of swords tended to diminish. But still, these bouts helped create spectacles, and for getting to know one's opponent more intimately. Harry learned more about the young Griff from a small training session than merely observing from a distance. He learned the boy was patient and methodical while training in the yard, which means the young Griff had a mind for strategy. The blue-haired boy was also easy to talk with, highlighting his willingness to listen. The boy was also humble and knew his limits. These were all good qualities for a leader. And Harry gleaned that the boy firmly believed he was the real deal. He had hoped to see some sinister plans in the young Griff's mind, but he found nothing nefarious other than some vengeful thoughts about House Lannister and Baratheon. The young Griff had been brought up with the firm belief that he was Aegon Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Ilya Martell. He thought about making a trip down the memory lane of John Connington's mind, but he thought better about it. It was not exactly a pleasant experience to sift through piles of memories in search of a small piece of information. So Harry devised a simpler solution to the dilemma. He planned to extract some blood from the young Griff and look for similarities with Jon's or even Nimriia's blood. It was less reliable than comparing the young Griff's blood with Rhaegar's or Ilya's. But he'd have to work with what he had. I suppose I'll have to look into crafting a whole new rune array to trace sibling blood ties, Harry thought with a frown. He quickly cleaned up and dressed in fresh clothes. He chose to wear a blue doublet with gold trimmings and black breeches as he prepared for a feast organized by Prince Doran in their honor. But after the feast, Prince Doran had also requested a closed-door meeting to discuss a personal matter. While that invite was solely for himself, he managed to include Robb as the future head of House Stark. Robb's presence in these talks was necessary. Some experience dealing with other nobles, especially that of other kingdoms, was sure to be a boon for Robb's future. The feast in Sunspear was a lively affair, like all feasts in the Seven Kingdoms. The tables in the feast hall were filled with lemon cakes, pies, lobster, and many other delicacies. There were even rare, spicy meats claimed to be Summer Island delicacies. The dance floor was filled with nobles of low and high standing dressed in fine silks and glittery, colorful face masks. Are you not joining the festive, Arianne? Harry found Nimriia holding 2 cups of wine in her hands, coming to a standstill near him dressed in a shimmering golden dress. My sisters would enjoy this, but not me, Harry shrugged. I know what you'd enjoy. I'd pull you into my bed and have my way with you. Nimriia winked at him, smiling sultrily. But for now, how about some Dornish red? Harry took the offered cup, while shooting Nimriia a warning look, as she brushed her hips closer to his own, in a rather public display of affection. What? Nimriia raised a brow challengingly. Are you intentionally trying to start rumors so that I'll be pressured to accept the betrothal offer from Prince Doran? Harry asked with exasperation. Is it working? Nimriia asked coyly. No, he said bluntly, shooting her an unimpressed stare. Really? Have you forgotten what it felt like to be in bed with 2 Dornish women? Nimriia asked sultrily, her eyes glinting with a familiar ember of passion he had seen at the Water Gardens. If you have forgotten, I'm more than happy to remind you. Harry took a quick sip of the wine after he made sure to check it was safe to drink. Did Arianne put you up to this? Harry asked. Oh, we are pretty much sure about what we want, Nimriia said boldly. Are you? Let me guess. Arianne thinks she can improve her position, and chances of maintaining her position as the heiress by marrying me. She thinks my military might ensure her ascension as the Princess of Dorne and keep her brother from usurping her post. Am I wrong? There was stunned silence from Nimriia after he finished. How do you? Nimriia looked at him with wide eyes. I know many things that happen under the sun. Your deserts are not as secretive as you might imagine, Harry said with a snort, but covered it up before the guest close by could notice by taking another sip from the wine cup. Nimriia remained silent for a moment before she set her wine cup aside. "Dance with me," Nimriia insisted, pressing a mask to his face. Harry drained the last drops of wine in his cup and snaked his left hand around Nimriia's waist before stepping together onto the dance floor. The bard started performing the Dornishman's Wife. He listened to the first few lines of the song as he followed the fast pace set by Nimriia on the dance floor. "Nice song, isn't it?" Nimriia asked. "Indeed. You should ask your cousin whether she really wants my help to maintain her hold on Doran. If she does, it won't come free. No matter how much I enjoy our dalliances in bed, my power and might are not so easily bought," he said bluntly. "What do you want, Harry?" Nimriia asked. Her expression was hard to decipher behind the red mask she chose to wear, but he could guess it was not pleasant. But he had nothing nefarious against the Dornish. If anything, many of his long-term plans depended on the Dorn and their rise in power in the region. So he leaned in close and allowed her to rest her cheek against his shoulder so that he could whisper into her ear. "Restoration of the Winter Throne and the Principality of Dorn. Independence from the Iron Throne is what I ask. Is your cousin prepared to support me in this venture?" "You want to rebel against the Iron Throne?" Nimriia asked in a hushed whisper. "Yes," Harry answered. He could see the disbelief in Nimes's eyes. "Is it so hard to believe that I don't enjoy being second to a king who is so far away and is weaker than my family?" "It is. Your father was friends with Robert Baratheon." Nimriia said, "Robert Baratheon is dead, and now his younger brother sits on the Iron Throne. The North bowed to the might of dragons, but now there are no dragons in the sky. Why should we bow to a Stormlander?" "Why should you?" Harry emphasized that part. Nimriia had fallen silent and stared at him with wide, observant eyes. "Let this be our secret. Yes. Tell this to Arianne, and no one else. If she wants to become the Princess of Dorn with my help, she must be ready to decide Dorn's future. Join me in breaking away from the Iron Throne and becoming independent kingdoms just like it was before Aegon's conquest," Harry said. "There'll be war," said Nimriia. "Are you unhappy with a war against the Iron Throne for Dorn's freedom?" Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. Her lips curved into a wide smile, and Harry had his answer. Harry relaxed in his bathtub after all the feasting, dancing, and long-winded discussion with Prince Doran. The water was slightly heated with his magic as the Dornish desert became chilly at night. As he expected, Prince Doran was interested in broaching the subject of the betrothal offer in their meeting. But that was a small portion of their discussion. A larger portion of the time in their discussion was spent discussing trade relations, especially the ice trade. The Martells knew they'd stand to lose more trade once the North built the Sunset Canal and Avalonian fleet to ensure the Sunset Sea was free from the Ironborn menace. Therefore, Prince Doran was keen to negotiate better trade deals, while Harry wanted access to Dornish ports and their trade with the Summer Isles. There was also some discussion on the feasibility of using Dornish ports and ships to expand the glass trade into the Summer Isles as well as lice and Volantis. That particular idea hinged on Avalon fleet gaining dominance in the Sunset Sea and Dornish cooperation in routing pirates in the Stepstones. After cleaning himself, Harry stepped out of the tub with a towel wrapped around his waist as he was about to get dressed and return to work on the runic array. A knock on the door interrupted his plans for the night. When he opened the door, Harry found Arianne standing outside his door in a flowing black silk dress that hugged her body's fine contours. "I was worried my black wolf would find his bed less warm," Arianne said coyly as she gracefully walked into his room without any inhibition. Harry cast his eyes out, but he could only see the fluttering lights here and there in the castle as night had consumed it. Still, he put a slew of privacy charms on his room as he closed the door and followed Arianne. She had already set herself on his bed and sat there boldly with her luscious black hair undone and her eyes shining with an excited gleam under the candlelight. "I'm told that my father broached the subject of betrothal with you in confidence," Arianne said, a lone finger twirling a lock of her hair while she gazed at him imploringly. "He did," Harry admitted. "And what did you say?" Arianne asked, leaning forward conveniently, letting her dress slip a bit, showing off her cleavage. "Did Prince Doran say anything to you?" Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. "No," Arianne pouted. "Then perhaps it's better for you not to know. What if I make it worth your while, my lord?" Arianne winked at him sensually as she pushed one of the straps that kept her silk dress aloft from her shoulder. Is that a risk that you should take, Arianne? What if I reject the proposal in truth and just want to use you by intentionally keeping you in the dark? I don't believe you would reject the betrothal offer, Arianne said confidently. Why so? He asked in amusement. Who else would tolerate another woman in your marriage bed, Arianne? If you marry me, you can also bed Nimriia or any other woman you want. Can any other woman make such a claim? Arianne pointed out. You make an interesting point, Harry said. But that is not enough to tie my fortunes with you. Yes, your plan to have the North go independent along with Doran. Arianne said with a contemplative look. Afraid of having to fight a war? Harry asked with a chuckle. We Dornish know more about wars for independence than the Northerners, Arianne said with a scowl. Oh, I know. I admire the tenacity of Dorne. With no dragons in the sky, I ask you, what prevents Dorne from declaring independence? Especially when you'll have my support. Why do you want the North and Dorne to go independent from the Iron Throne? Arianne asked. Why should I or my children serve those with lesser power? I suppose that is a good reason as any. Arianne nodded to herself before crawling into the bed and slipping down the send strap, holding her black dress. I'll give you my answer in bed. Harry couldn't discard such an invitation, especially when the Dornish princess snatched the towel he had wrapped around his waist with a playful laugh. Harry watched Sunspear disappear from the bow of the Liberator. Did you get it? Rob asked, joining Harry to watch the coast of Dorne disappear in the distance. Harry pulled out a small vial of blood from his pocket and showed it to Rob. He had shared the true identity of the young Griff with Rob on the morning of their departure, and his plans to confirm whether the boy was a mummer or the real Aegon. If he is Aegon, he'll be Jon's brother, Rob said. I know. What do you do if he is Jon's brother? Asked Rob. First, we must know whether he is Jon's brother. After that, Jon will decide what we should do. After all, he is our brother, Harry said, looking at his twin for approval. I agree. But maybe we can just sneak in and throw the Iron Throne into the middle of the sea. Rob suggested. You know what? Harry patted his brother's shoulder with a smirk. That's a fantastic idea. Harry frowned at the runic array he had come up with for a long time before sighing and burning the parchment away before starting over again. He was in his quarters in the Liberator, well rested and nourished. Nothing distracted him, but he couldn't complete the runic array to trace sibling blood relations. There was no easy fix, considering all blood-based magic required precision, leaving no room for error. The unfortunate part was that all bloodline tracing he knew was based on using a blood sample as a root origin, and then using it to track descendants. If he had Rhaegar's or Elia's blood, it would have been easy for the magic to trace genetic markers. He could have easily made the connection if he had the blood of Targaryen and Martell elders, but they were all dead. It was like trying to chart a graph with no common origin point. He could trace the similarities in blood between the two samples, but the results could end up being anything, and he'd have no method to confirm whether it was true or not. To make matters worse, Aegon and Jon are only half-brothers, complicating things. The crux of the matter was the absence of blood samples from an older Targaryen ancestor. Without this crucial link, it wasn't easy to establish a tangible connection between the young Griff and Jon, a fact that weighed heavily on Harry's mind. Or maybe he was overthinking this stuff, and all he had to do was express what he wanted through the runes and trust the magic to find it. Usually, children inherited something from their parents and traces of magic were there to map. However, siblings didn't inherit anything from each other, especially when they were only half-brothers. The only way he could make it work was to retrace the bloodline from the bottom up, which was better said than done. The only elder Targaryen blood in his hand was from Maester Aemon. If he could retrace young Griff's and Jon's blood to somehow connect with Maester Aemon's blood, then a common ancestor could be established. It was difficult for him to devise a whole new runic array on the fly when he was also sufficiently engaged in making hundreds of snitches for the all-seeing table. Who knew lining the entire narrow sea with little snitches was a long, tedious, time-consuming days of uninterrupted hard work. From Dorne to the north, he wanted the entire narrow sea mined with the snitches so that he could monitor all shipping lanes. The trick to gaining naval superiority was gaining control over a chain of ports in the many seas, monitoring all sea lanes, and spreading the fleet across those ports and lanes to project military strength. But the work it was taking to achieve that was getting ridiculous, even with help from Elsera, Jon, and the others. His fingers were getting swollen after carving those runes day after day, and the hard thing was that he didn't have anything else to do. He was also getting bored after getting cooped up in the ship for too long after they left Sunspear. The only silver lining was that he was not as bored as everyone, all thanks to someone on his bed. Harry's eyes strayed to the soundly sleeping figure of Alanara. Her long legs peeked out from the black silk sheet covering her nubile body. Her curly silver hair was sprawled out over the pillow, while her chest rose and fell like serene waves of the ocean. He thought about returning to bed and spending the rest of the night with a warm body lulling him to sleep. It was very tempting, but he tore his eyes away from the sleeping form of his paramour and set them on the trunk that hosted winter. He looked between the trunk and the unfinished rune array. Letting out a sigh, he left the array and took the trunk outside. The trunk floated by his side as he silently made his way into the deck of the Liberator. The Liberator was floating high in the sky, which made the stars appear far closer. There was a full moon in the sky, bathing the entire deck of the Liberator in an ethereal silver light. Seeing the night sky so heavenly above his head made it so mesmerizing that he forgot himself and watched it for a few minutes. Wow, this view should ease some of the complaints from winter, Harry mused. If he and everyone else on the ship were bored, then it was far worse for Winter because of his tight schedule. He was unavailable to visit the ice dragon in her lair as often as he ought to. While Harry had ensured he had filled the pocket dimension hosting Winter-hosted other animals, the she-dragon had quickly grown bored because of the need for more intelligent conversation. Harry cast a spell on the trunk to connect the pocket dimension to the world and send in a messenger Patronus. He kept the trunk lid open and directed the exit door safely away from any portion of the ship. Winter flew out of the pocket dimension with a whoosh of air and circled around the ship. Woo, this is so fun! The moon is so beautiful tonight. Winter excitedly shouted into his mind. Well, you wanted to enjoy the full moon. Now enjoy. Harry shouted back through their telepathic link. While Harry might have enjoyed and been fascinated with their little talks telepathically, he was also equally put off because he still hadn't developed a suitable occlumency technique to keep Winter out of his mind. All ice dragons had that natural ability to breach the minds of all mortal creatures for some reason, but he still hadn't figured out how that worked. Frankly, with the number of projects and other matters that took up his time, he hadn't spent much time researching a possible mental defense against Winter's ability. Winter was a cute, darling dragon. He trusted her with his secrets because she was as much a daughter as a dragon could ever be. After all, he had raised her and taught her about the world. The only reason that he wanted to shield his mind from Winter was because of his memories of certain activities. Ew, Winter screeched in his mind as his mind went to the many nights he spent with Nimriia, and Arianne. Harry winced as Winter's loud, squeaky voice screeched in his mind. Can't you just stop thinking about what you did to those three for even a minute? Winter huffed. Why should I? It's only natural for a man to think about the women he bedded. Harry said petulantly, Shame on you for snooping around in my mind. Why are you blaming me? You're the supposed great sorcerer of the North. Go find a way to shield your mind, Harry, Winter said, twisting herself mid-flight and spreading her wings to arrest her momentum and take in the sight of the stars in the night sky. You know what? I'm going to do just that. I'm turning around this ship to the north and searching for a way to keep you out of my mind. Harry threatened as he watched Winter circle the Liberator with her silver and blue scales gleaming under the moonlight. You do that instead of wasting time in this sea, Harry. Now leave me to enjoy some moonlight in peace. Woo, Winter said as she dived into the sea below. Ungrateful ice dragon. No respect whatsoever for her elders. Harry muttered as he watched the she-dragon gracefully pull out of the dive and glide over the sea surface with her talons, just gracing the water. Show off! You stole that move after watching me perform the Ronsky feint, Harry accused, but he could only hear laughter from the telepathic bond. But he did listen to her advice. When the morning came, he declared that their mining operation in the Narrow Sea had been suspended and that they were returning home. The very next minute, the people in the Liberator threw a party to celebrate their impending return to the north, showing just how eager they were to leave the Narrow Sea. With this, their 3-month-long journey had come to an end. Asha Greyjoy was furious and humiliated beyond her wildest dreams. As a woman, she had faced a fair share of insults, puns, and hostility from the men in the Iron Fleet ever since she decided her fortunes lay in the sea. But she had overcome them all by gutting any men standing in her way without mercy. She had proved she was a Greyjoy and, being a woman, had no standing on her skill in the sea. That was how she became a captain of her own ship. But now Asha felt a grave insult was being done to her and her house in the north. She had approached Winterfell on the advice of her uncle to ensure their way of life was no longer suppressed. She wanted the Starks to pull back their fleets from their seas and allow her to confront her uncle. She had even hoped with Theon's help she could chart a path to secure an alliance with House Stark to confront her uncle. Victurion. But all her plans were on indefinite hold when she arrived at Winterfell. At first it was the absent Lord of Winterfell who made her journey useless. But she could at least understand that Lord Stark was a busy man, and he had to govern a vast kingdom. The demands of his position required a long absence from his seat of power to visit his bannermen. So she used that time to get to know her brother, and the more she learned of him, the less impressed she became. Her wastrel of a brother was having an opulent life in Winterfell while she was working day and night, battling Lycian pirates and the prejudices of her own people to claw herself into a position of power. Ian spent his days in the whorehouses of Wintertown while their people were being destroyed day by day. If that was not enough, her brother had no intention of helping her unseat Victarion from Pike. Instead, her idiot brother was intent on working against her. The moron thinks he could just sail into the Iron Isles and take Pike from Victarion, all because he has a cock. Asha thought with a scowl while staring into the training yard of Winterfell, where her brother was practicing archery. But even if her brother was being a moron, her troubles didn't end there, because the wandering Lord of Winterfell returned to Winterfell in his horse, with fluttering wolf banners on his back. Asha immediately asked for an audience and demanded that the North pull back its fleet from her islands. Not only did Lord Stark deny her accusations, but he also accused the Ironborn of starting all hostilities. Unfortunately, Asha was aware Lord Stark was right on the latter. However, her understanding aside, she was still left with no solution to her dilemma. Lord Stark refused to do anything until his son, the Lord of Avalon, returned from his trip abroad. To add insult to injury, the Lord of Winterfell had the audacity to claim that he had no knowledge of the activities of the North's fleet, nor control over it. She didn't believe such claims. But still, she decided to wait, and she had been nearly in Winterfell for a month, with nothing to show for it. "We should leave Asha. There's nothing for us to do here," Christopher Bawdsley said, standing beside her. "Return and do what? Wait for a sure death," Asha snorted. "I say we face death if that is what awaits us. My father and brother fought the Northmen and died in Lord Sport." Christopher growled with a clenched fist, making Asha roll her eyes. "If it is revenge you seek, you should travel further north and find my father at the wall." It was his idiotic idea to snipe at the wolf's tail, forgetting that the wolf had grown wings. Asha said bitterly, "It was Arianne Stark who rained hell upon us from his monstrous ship, not Lord Bowen." Christopher defended the late Lord of the Pike. "He might as well have. He brought hell to my life, so he must have done the same for the rest of you lot." Asha sighed. "We could spend this time gathering support instead of wasting it on Winterfell. They have clearly no intention of stopping what they're doing. The taking of Blacktide and Herla has shown what they really want, and if the rumors of this canal are true, it makes all the sense why they're doing this." Aisha sighed, knowing her childhood friend spoke sense. They only came to know about the canal because they were in Winterfell, and they happened to hear rumors about it. House Stark planned to build a canal, connecting the Salt Spear with the Bight. It meant that the Narrow Sea and the Sunset Sea could be connected, and sailing around Dorne was no longer necessary. Knowing the plans about the touted Sunset Canal made her understand what Arianne Stark was playing at. The Lord of Avalon wanted the Ironborn out of the seas to protect his precious trade. The Lycian pirates, she knew, had wanted to strike at the trade vessels of Avalon once they knew that Avalon was supplying glass to the rest of Westeros. But now the war had ravaged the Iron Isles, and she knew Arianne Stark was intent on pushing the Ironborn deeper into their islands and confining them to the land while his fleet dominated the seas. It was a dangerous situation. The sea was the lifeblood of the Ironborn. Without the sea, her people would wither and die. Is that what Arianne Stark wants? Is he pushing us out of the sea and into the land so that we'll starve and turn on each other and destroy ourselves? Asha wondered with a troubled look. A few months back, she'd have laughed at her own thoughts that a Greenlander would have the stomach to starve her islands and destroy her people. But she had seen and heard the tales of Arianne Stark from her people. The Lord of Avalon was no weak Greenlander foe. He was merciless to his enemies, and he knew where to strike and hurt them the most. Taking the Sea Stone chair and the remains of the Sea Dragon from Old Wipe was not done without any planning. It was a pre-planned act to destabilize the legitimacy of any new king in the Iron Isles. It made her less confident that she was waiting in Winterfell to appeal to the better senses of a boy intent on wiping out the Ironborn. Not even the Targaryens at the height of their power had come as close as Harry and Stark, and they had dragons on their side. Perhaps Christopher is right. I'm wasting my time here, Asha thought. Suddenly, a huge shadow fell on the training yard, and the people below were running towards the eastern side of the yard, their eyes pointing to the sky. Asha exchanged a look with Christopher before they broke out into a run, until they came to a portion of the corridor where they could see a massive ship floating in the sky. That's him. That's Harry and Stark's warship, Christopher said with a slight inflection in his voice. Asha knew her friend had faced that same ship in battle at Pike, but she had the fortune not to face the flying ship of the Starks in battle. Despite the word she got from her family, friends, and some trusted captains of the Iron Fleet, she had hoped they were exaggerating. But now the truth was before her, as clear as daylight. Harry lounged on a chair in the astronomy tower, reading through some of the latest findings and observations gathered by Maester Luwin and the many acolytes the Citadel had sent to Winterfell. The astronomy tower he had raised had become a hub of space studies, with the Citadel paying exorbitant gold and silver to access the telescopes he developed. Of course, the Archmaesters had tried to buy the telescopes from him, promising a large sum of gold. They approached him through House Hightower when he denied them, but again he denied them a telescope of his design, but he wanted their trade and their ships, which made him grant them access to Winterfell's telescopes. There was another reason he did this. He got easy access to all their research without spending a dime, which was an advantage, and right now, he was looking into that research. The acolytes studied planetary movements and tracked comets coming in and out of the star system. He was still getting requests from the Citadel to make them a telescope, and it became a ritual to send them letters of denial. Knowledge was priceless, after all. He assumed the number of letters would only increase once he unveiled the treasure he gathered from Valyria. It would attract all sorts of attention, but the Canal would also do the same. However, he had to deal with some undesirable elements from Winterfell before any of that happened. His mother informed him about a Jack Greyjoy's presence in the castle. She mainly complained about the arrogant Ironborn girl setting dangerous examples to Sansa and Arya. Harry couldn't agree more with his mother. The Ironborn were useless people, and they were not something one could aspire to. It was one of the reasons why he immediately dumped a lot of the rune work on his two sisters. It kept them engaged, and at the same time it kept them away from the Greyjoy pirate. While his mother intended to send away the Ironborn, his father was another matter. His father's sense of honor tinkled in the most unfortunate of times, usually bringing a lot of needless problems with it. But he had promised his father that he'd have a heart-to-heart talk with Asha Greyjoy and hear her concerns. Thankfully, his father didn't ask for more, probably because of the disapproving frown his lady mother shot his father. The whole time, at times like these, he thanked his mother's Riverland roots. The Riverlanders knew a good Ironborn was a dead Ironborn. But Harry knew he was not off the hook. His actions in Myr were still a matter of discussion, and he took his sweet time to return after Myr was burned to the ground despite a direct order from his father. Harry was alerted when the intruder ward he set up on the tower's base got tripped, but when he focused his senses on the intruder, he became less concerned. He waited patiently on the topmost chamber of the tower, with parchments and records strewn across the table. When the door behind him opened, he cast his eyes out and found Maester Luwin's wizened old gray eyes. "I had a feeling you might be here when I saw the light in this tower at this hour," said Luwin. "Master Luwin, you seem to have something to say to me." Harry frowned at his old teacher, who looked troubled and shifty. You were always very observant," said Luwin. Harry conjured a chair and gestured at Maester Luwin to take the seat. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Harry asked once the old maester made himself comfortable on the chair. There was a small change in the taxing code that the king made. "I see." Harry eyed the maester with a poker face. "What change did the tax code undergo while we just decided to build a canal?" The troubled look on Maester Luwin's face only became more pronounced. "You understand that the Targaryens made the tax law?" "I understand." "Go on." Harry nodded. "I assume you're also familiar with the taxes King Aegon implemented for building new castles, adding walls to existing castles, or other defensive constructs?" "I'm quite familiar with that particular tax. It was one of those taxes that was intended to keep the minor lords and landed knights underpowered and kept the high lords unchallenged. It kept the High Lords in dinnons, as the Iron Throne preferred not to change the power balance in the kingdoms. Yes, that one, Maester Luwin said with a forced smile. Well, they changed that code to include any construction on the land that could be used for defensive purposes. I see, Harry hummed thoughtfully. They want the canal to be included as a defensive construct because it cuts through the mainland and we could block an invading army if we destroy the bridge across the canal. Yes, indeed. Very clever of them. It's too bad I have no intention of paying tax for such a ridiculous law, said Harry. I gathered you might say something like that. Luwin rubbed his forehead with a sigh. Now I came here to convince you otherwise. Of course you did, Harry chuckled. No matter who tried to convince him, he was not going to send a dime as taxes for constructing a canal. Harry felt like he was wasting his precious time in his father's solar. Unfortunately, he couldn't ignore a direct order from his father, and that was why he was here listening to the little pirate girl as she whined and whined without an end. It was grating on his nerves, and he regretted not putting an end to the entire pirate-infested Iron Islands to the sword. We want autonomy. We want our shores back. We want our ships to sail without the threat of your fleet, Asha shouted while glaring indignantly at him as if he was somehow in the wrong. As I have repeatedly said for the last hour, Harry sighed tiredly with a bored look, the Avalonian fleet is charged with routing pirates in the Sunset Sea. Then why are your ship attacking Ironborn ships in the open seas? Asha asked, enraged. Because they are pirates who rape, pillage, kill, and steal, Harry said calmly. I have charged my ships to eradicate such scum from my seas. Your seas? Asha screamed. Yes, my seas. If you haven't noticed, Blacktide and Harlaw are sworn to Avalon. I won't have those islands and the waters around them infested or threatened by pirates, said Harry, glaring at the Ironborn woman. Those islands are not yours to hold. These are part of the Iron Islands, Asha growled, turning in her seat to glare at him openly. You are welcome to reclaim them from my control using the old ways. I took them by force after your people attacked Avalon. Isn't that how Ironborn trades? Take anything they want by force. I have paid the iron price and claimed 2 islands with force. If you have the metal, you're welcome to try and reclaim them, said Harry, staring challengingly at the Greyjoy girl. He could see Asha Greyjoy was ready to blow up with all the pent-up righteous anger. Harry could understand why the Greyjoy woman was incensed. If he were in her position, he'd be similarly hostile and looking for any means necessary to reclaim the islands. But the simple fact was that, in Westeros, only might and will determine all outcomes. If Avalon hadn't had the might and will, they wouldn't have conquered Harlaw and Blacktide. But you have to admit, Lord Stark, it is because of your people that a grave injustice has been visited on myself and my brother, said Ayasha, turning her attention to the Lord of Winterfell, making Harry raise a brow. What injustice is that, Lady Greyjoy? Eddard asked with a stoic face. The injustice of having my birthright being denied. My uncle has usurped Pike when it should have been mine. Yours? How can Pike be yours when Lord Balon has a true-born son? It seems you are simply a thief who got disgruntled that another thief stole your loot. Harry snarked while rolling his eyes. Pike is mine, and Theon's it's our birthright, said Asha, as if the slip of tongue didn't happen. Harry snorted and rolled his eyes at Asha Greyjoy. I'm afraid you are in the wrong place with your case, Lady Greyjoy. If you feel your uncle has stolen your birthright, you are more than welcome to reach out to the Iron Throne. King Stannis shall hear your plea in his court and take due measures he deems necessary. Eddard spoke. My father is right. House Stark has no reason or interest in the internal matters of House Greyjoy. Harry also pitched in. You caused this situation. If it weren't for you, Victarion wouldn't have usurped my birthright, Asha said, incensed. Your father is the cause of all your misfortunes, Asha Greyjoy. The man started 2 unprovoked wars. Consider it a mercy that his head remains on his shoulders. Harry growled back, losing his patience with the uppity Ironborn. Asha started, but Eddard cleared his throat quite loudly, earning her attention. That's enough. I have summoned my son, and we've heard you. While the situation with Victarion Greyjoy is unfortunate, the North has no interest in the internal matters of House Greyjoy, Eddard said firmly while looking nonchalantly at Balon's daughter. Harry was also quite happy with that stance. After all, it didn't matter who ruled from Pike. The systematic destruction of the Ironborn was already happening. A civil war would only accelerate their destruction, and Harry believed he ought to do nothing when his enemies made costly mistakes. However, in the spirit of your visit, I shall promise you that no Ironborn ships will be attacked. Eddard added, making Harry frown. So long as they are trade vessels and not reaving parties, your ships will be allowed to sail the seas. Harry quickly added to his father's promise before any unnecessary constraints were placed on the current doctrine of his fleet. Who are you to judge which of our ships should pass through the seas? Asha asked, glaring at Harry. I'm the one who decimated your islands and can easily do so a second time if you so wish. I will put the trade interests of the North above any perceived difficulties of a bunch of pirates who want to rape, murder, and loot my people. Harry shot back, and once again they were back to the initial argument. Harry was getting the urge to just put the uppity Greyjoy under the Imperious curse and be done with this farce. He was losing precious time planning for the Sunset Canal and some quality time with his siblings, all due to the constant whining of Ashaka Greyjoy. Lady Greyjoy, while it is unfortunate that Pike is under your uncle's control, this has nothing to do with the North. It would be best if you dealt with the internal matters of House Greyjoy yourself. The North has no interest in getting involved in your affairs. If you have more grievances, I suggest you take them up with King Stannis. Eddard said with a note of finality that brooked no argument. Fine. Then how do you expect us to show that sour ships are trade vessels? Do you want us to paint our sails with big letters so that you can see from your castles? Asha snarked. Of course not. I wouldn't ask such a difficult task of the illiterate pirates that infest your islands. No, not at all. Harry shook his head innocently. Instead, your ships will be boarded by my officers and inspected to determine whether they are traders or reavers. The protests came immediately from Asha Greyjoy, accusing him of insulting her people and being unfair to her ships. But all her huffing and puffing didn't move his father, who ended up taking a strong position for once. Perhaps it was his father's disinterest in getting involved in the Iron Isles, or his silent approval in keeping the Ironborn confined to their islands. Harry didn't mind what it was so long as his plans for the Sunset Sea were undisturbed. Many of his plans for expanding the North's grip on the Seven Kingdoms depended on their hold on the Sunset Sea and the Narrow Sea. If he couldn't control the Sunset Sea, then the Sunset Canal would become a waste of time and resources. Unfortunately for the Ironborn, they were in his way. Harry watched with an amused smile as Asha Greyjoy left his father's solar with a huff. Only when the door slammed shut, he turned to his father with a look of approval. Not a word, Eddard said, holding up his hand, making Harry frown. I know what you're doing. You're somehow fomenting a rebellion amongst the Ironborn. If it weren't for those White Walkers, I'd have ordered you to stop all this nonsense. Harry got the urge to correct his father, but bit his tongue at the last minute. Sometimes, it was like looking into a mirror. Most of the time, he could see the old, naive Harry Potter in his father. Whenever he saw that manifest, he was overwhelmed by a sense of exasperation and nostalgia. There are different ways of dealing with an enemy, and not all enemies require the same method. Would you be happy if I allowed these pirates to regain their strength and wait for them to attack? Harry asked rhetorically. It is not honorable to wage a shadow war on a defeated foe, Eddard said stubbornly. And when the Ironborn grow their strength and attack our people, how many innocents will pay the price with their blood and tears for your honor? Harry asked, but his father had no answer. If Theon Stark hadn't set Andalos ablaze, do you think House Stark would have survived to this day? See, I'm not interested in this argument, Arianne, Eddard said, sighing tiredly. You read too much of our family's past and think everything can be solved with brute force. Your actions in Myr have made many lords uneasy. Good! They should know that if they come after Stark, a certain death is all they can expect, said Harry. This is the impetuousness of the youth speaking, my son. Needless bloodletting has never sustained great kingdoms for too long. Look at the Targaryens. They thought they could rule for thousands of years. And look where that has landed them, Eddard said wearily, rubbing his face. They fell because of the illusion of power and the stories of dragons long lost in the dance. They believed in the myth of old Valyria's power as their own, which led to their defeat. They had a deranged king and prince who were disengaged from reality, unlike their predecessors who saw the kingdoms as their power, not prophecies and dragon skeletons, Harry said patiently. It had always been like this with his father. The Targaryens had left a burning scar in his father's mind that could never heal. Having great insight into the mind and the thoughts that occupied it, Harry already knew his father thought doing things the Targaryens did was bereft of honor. It was as if the shadows of the Targaryen regime ruled his father through fear. Enough! I grow weary of talking so callously of lives lost and battles fought in the past, Eddard said firmly, looking anywhere but into Harry's eyes. Harry let the matter drop and instead broached a less controversial subject. Once I have made some inspections with the fleet's status, I'm ready to carve out the canal, said Harry. With your permission, shall I call on the Lords of the North to stand witness to the spectacle? Harry watched his father ponder for a long moment before looking at him. Legends say the children attempted the Hammer of Waters from the Children's Tower of Moat Kylan, which led to the creation of a swampy neck. You are attempting something similar. I suppose the Lords of the North should be informed beforehand, and they must stand witness, said Eddard, nodding to himself towards the end. A feast, then? Harry prodded. Yes, Winterfell could host it, and it should be enough time for you to settle matters with the fleet and prepare, is it not? Eddard inquired. Indeed, that's more than enough time, Harry agreed. Good, Eddard nodded. I'll ask Master Llewellyn to send the ravens immediately. There is one other thing, Father. Oh, what is it, son? Eddard asked curiously. While we were journeying in Essos, I took the Liberator across the ruins of Nimriia, and Harry started but was cut off by a shout from his father. You did what? Eddard bellowed in utter surprise. I looted Valyria, Father. There was a substantial haul of wealth found in Valyria, and I have brought it back with me. I want to part with a portion of it in Winterfell. Consider it a gift. It was quite accurate to say that he had stumped his father into shock. But that was nothing compared to the shock of the rest of his family when he brought a portion of the treasure into Winterfell and created a small treasure room in the Great Keep. I don't think Sansa will ever stop wearing that sapphire necklace, said Jon. I could see that in her eyes. Oh, I wouldn't be so sure. When she realizes it is not a magical necklace that captures bad dreams, she might let the thing gather dust in a safe. Harry snickered. You made her believe that? Jon asked in surprise. Oh yes, it was quite easy. All I had to say was there were ancient enchantments by Valyrian sorcerers on the necklace. But wouldn't she have known it was not so? I mean, she has taken lessons from you about magic, said Jon. Some lessons are better learned from experience and a healthy dose of curiosity. Let's see how long it take her to realize the necklace is not magical, Harry said with an amused look. You ever thought about what Sansa would do to you once she realizes you were deceiving her? Jon asked. Harry looked at the clouds passing by and shrugged his shoulders. I'm sure she'll appreciate the lesson. And the lesson being? Jon raised a skeptical brow. Trust, but verify. Oh, Jon hummed thoughtfully before he froze all of a sudden. Harry watched his brother shoot him a searching look before bolting from the Liberator's port side and climbing down inside the deck. Harry just shook his head and leaned over the railing, watching the passing forest and hills as the Liberator drew closer to Avalon. What's wrong with your brother? Alanara asked, joining him on the port side. He was cursing your name and swearing vengeance against you as he ran past me. Don't mind him. He is just mad that he got tricked into believing a medallion I gifted him chased away ghosts, Harry said with a grin. That's so inconsiderate. You know Jon fears ghosts, Yaz'll lose your admonished him. If anything, I'm the one who is supposed to be offended. I taught him all about magic, but he can't even sense a transfigured pebble. Harry shook his head in exasperation. You are so childish sometimes, Alanara said with a huff. Harry let the comment wash away by deigning it unimportant for a response. Instead, he cast his eyes on the long road that stretched across the center of Wolfswood. The Wolfswood Road led straight to Avalon, and its width made it easily identifiable even if it was cutting through a thick forest. When you said the North was huge, I never understood just how huge it might be. I don't think I have ever seen a forest this large, said Alanara, looking down from the Liberator at the Wolfswood, which stretched across for leagues as far as their eyes could see. It's because you've lived inside a city and never went outside its walls. Considering the landmass, I'm sure there are more forested areas in Essos. You might be right, but look at this road. It stretches on for miles. I have only heard about the dragon roads being this long and wide, said Alanara as she looked at the shiny white road in awe from the deck of the Liberator. You'll see more roads like these in Westeros, said Harry. How is your training as a Valkyrie coming along? Anya has started training me with a knife. You don't sound that excited, Harry noticed. I don't think Anya approves of my relationship with you. She thinks it'll be a distraction from the duties of a Valkyrie. Alanara shrugged. Ah, she was a spearwife in the northern mountains. She is more martially inclined than most women. Once you show improvement in her lessons, she'll come to like you and treat you as a sister. Alanara suddenly gasped and pointed westward. Is that Avalon? Alazir asked excitedly. Sure enough, he could see the silhouette of some towers in the distance. The walls and other constructs around the castle slowly became visible as the Liberator moved closer to the castle. Yup, that is Avalon. Is it as huge as Winterfell? Alanira asked, her eyes pinned on the castle drawing closer. You'll see soon enough, Harry smiled. As the Liberator sailed into the space directly over the castle, he could see some marked changes on his land. The ships at the harbor had decreased, but that was understandable. They were spread out in the Sunset Sea along the islands of Blacktide, Bear Island, and the 3 small islands near the Salt Spear, but he was happy to note that there were many ships under construction in the harbor. He could also see the Namesday gift he was building for Robb was nearly finished. It was another airship, and once completed, he hoped to give it to Robb as a Namesday present someday. It was one of the reasons why he had Anya train Robb on flying the Liberator. From a cursory look at the newly built airship, he could see that some work was required to be completed on the captain's cabin above the deck. There was also some work to be done with the enchantments inside the deck. However, such works could be completed once he found some spare time after the canal was built. The Liberator lowered into the courtyard and gently touched down on the ground. Already, he could see Maester Marwyn and the other Valkyrie guards assembled near the courtyard to welcome them into the castle. Have the people escorted into the castle and find them ample lodgings. We'll have their houses built after I plot a land suitable for their lodgings, he said to Anya before disembarking the Liberator. Yes, my lord. Anya nodded but looked expectantly at Alanara. Go with her. Some of those Locini do not speak the common tongue. Harry said to his paramour. As you wish, my lord. Alanara gave him an exaggerated bow which let him glimpse down her dress before scurrying off. Harry shook his head at her antics and looked around for John. The last thing he wanted was a stampede from the former slaves he brought from Lice. Having them spread out into the land without any plan was also a bad idea. But he could host them in his castle and slowly insert them into Avalon proper. After all, if he just left them to their own devices, he had no doubt they'd huddle together and form a little lice in Avalon. That was not an outcome he had in mind. Suddenly he found John walking out of the ship. John, you'll escort the rest of the treasure into the castle. Take whatever men you need, but I doubt you'd need more than 10. After all, they're safely stored in trunks. I'll see it done. John nodded. John talked with Josiera and Alciera, enlisting their help, transporting the treasure into the castle. With that done, Harry approached Maester Merwin, Kyla, and Adela. My lord, welcome back to Avalon. Maester Merwin greeted him while the 2 Valkyrie bowed. It's good to be back. Harry breathed in the minty smell of Avalon with a pleased grin. The ravens have been sent to all the northern houses to gather at Winterfell for a feast. After that, we'll carve out the canal, but before that, I need to know the status of my fleet and the missions I gave them. Please, let's go inside and discuss this in detail, my lord, said Maester Merwin. Harry had spent a better portion of his time in Avalon looking over the reports, mainly about the construction of roads, the earnings from the glass and ice trade, the expansion of settlements in Avalon because of more people into Sea Dragon Point, the fluctuating timber trade, and most importantly, the progress of the bank he was building from scratch. Maester Morwyn was a reliable administrator, as was Salos Poole, but he wanted to read some of the major happenings while he was away. The ambitious expansion of Avalon's harbor and the subsequent construction of ports along the 3 islands of Blazewater Bay and Blacktide posed significant challenges. The project required a substantial workforce and a vast amount of materials. While there was no shortage of workers, extracting raw materials, particularly timber and stone, proved to be a major hurdle. The rapid development in the north had created a void in the availability of these resources. The expansion of the King's Road north of the Neck, the reconstruction of Moat Cailin, the renovations in Winterfell, the construction of castles in the Gift, and the roads branching out across the Gift all required quality timber, stone, and other materials. Nonetheless, Harry raised an eyebrow when he saw the request for the number of new quarries to be opened from the Stonemason Guild. 7 more quarries? Harry asked, delicately. Is that really necessary? We have more workers, my lord. But having them all work on the same quarries has not increased the yield. It'll be prudent to send our workforce to new quarries, Sospool said. Before any new quarries are opened, ensure that permission is obtained from the chieftains of the mountain clans. We must be respectful of their sacred grounds. It'll be done, my lord. Might I suggest we invite the chieftains and have them informed rather than send messengers? Harry gave it some thought before giving his consent. After all, the clansmen were not his bannermen. He had a better relationship with them owing to the Stark name and the aid he provided them on his last visit. I suppose that is for the best. I suppose we ought to have a talk with the clansmen about those silver mines we found while mining for stones. Harry mused aloud. Aye, my lord. Shilos nodded. The clansmen consider metal to be the gift from the old gods. They revere it, Josian suddenly said, making Harry's eyebrows climb upon hearing the unusually silent Squire speak. The lad is not wrong, my lord. We'll need all 18 chieftains to agree to mine the silver, Silas said, nodding at the young reed, who squirmed in his seat at the attention he garnered. Harry stared at the young reed, who served as his squire and page. The boy was a bright fellow, with a good handle on his numbers and letters, despite celebrating only his 11th namesday. The reed heir was also a budding greenseer, and he had been trying to enhance the boy's power with some occlumency training. The immense psionic powers lying dormant in Josian's blood were taking a toll on his health. It was still a work in progress. I'll have a word with them. We shall, of course, cause no harm to any sacred grounds of the old gods. Harry said after a minute of pondering, What is the status of the roads we were constructing to the stony shore? They have completed, but I remind you, my lord, they're not paved like the Wolfswood Road, Suluz said cautiously. I remember, but if we gain permission from the chieftains, we can start paving the roads for easier transport, Harry suggested. He had so far put off exploring more silver and gold in the mountains and riverbanks because it was labor-intensive work, and there was no immediate need for such precious metals. After all, there were other priorities to consider at the time of their discovery. The clansmen living near the hills of Stony Shore had enjoyed relative freedom in what they did with their lands. House Fisher had historically not pressed any authority over the hills. Since Avalon had risen at Sea Dragon Point, the clansmen were inclined to show deference to him. While they had not sworn any oaths, they presented themselves each year with gifts from their mountains. They had even given him their warriors for Avalon's protection. In return, Harry was all too happy to ensure the clansmen had access to Avalon's riches and safe haven when storms struck. The landslides that happened in the mountains were also a threat to their livelihood. Therefore, he built a permanent shelter for them northeast of his castle and promised to buy their wares, which included fine fur, boiled leather, honey, and bronze utensils. In fact, most of his household guards came from the clansmen of the Stony Shore in the northern mountains, as did the greatest supply of cordage for his ship's rigging. The clansmen were also good hunters and gatherers of natural herbs to make medicines. They were some of the best local healers, and their services were coveted during times of war. Even House Fisher had mostly seen him with deference, even though they were an old family and kings in the past. But that was mostly because he had helped them improve their earnings by buying gin from their lands and expelling all Ironborn and pirates from the shores for good. The last time he met with Lord Fisher, the man was positively beaming about fishing becoming so profitable now that the shores were safe. He was also in talks with House Fisher to establish several lighthouses along the coasts to guide ships sailing from afar. With the Blazewater Bay Islands under his control, it was imperative to ensure the shores were properly noticeable so that ships could sail unimpeded during rainy nights. And when the fog set in, we'll have another discussion on the scope of the mines later tonight. For now, tell me more about our planned expansion of Glassglow Street, Ice Street, and Smith Street, Harry said, setting aside all the other reports in favor of listening to this particular frontier. He leaned forward in interest as his Castellan explained the inroads the bank had been making by giving loans to glass workers, ice merchants, and smiths to set up shops or even their houses. It was a planned expansion of a budding city, and Harry was keen to see Avalon expand into a city. Metalwork, glass trade, and ice trade were some of the lucrative businesses in Avalon. Therefore, he wanted 3 industrial districts built to urbanize and increase his domain's productivity. It was also a testing field to see whether building a city would be sustainable in the long run, or if he should just leave the city to build around his castle organically. So far, his attempts to urbanize the harbor have been touching some level of success. The sailors in the officer corps of his budding fleet had been encouraged to house their families around the harbor. It was his tentative attempt to make a military district, And so far, it was going better than he had thought. The last reports showed more and more sailors, fleet officers, shipbuilders, and captains taking up residence in the substantial land grants he had reserved for them. After all, it was much easier to raise a new generation of sailors amongst a community of navy families. In the coming years, the fleet would become the backbone of the North, and he already had a new target once the canal was finished to test the full might of his fleet. But first, there was more inspection to be done, and he needed to be elsewhere to see the progress with his own eyes. Harry spent an entire day in Avalon, mostly inspecting the bank's progress and hearing petitions. He also visited some of the settlements and the God's Grove Knights to discuss the expansion of settlements and take opinions about conserving the groves within the settlements. There were some complaints from the fisher folk that some of their villages were not getting access to the promised amount of ice from the merchants. It was not an unforeseen issue, as merchants were naturally inclined to sell their ice outside the north, which had a more lucrative price. In the end, greed always triumphed one way or the other. Harry had to make alternate arrangements on the spot. The solution was to cut out the merchants from doing business with fisherfolk and take up that business with Avalon. He had tried to avoid this because it was a slippery slope. He disliked interfering in trade matters so directly, but keeping the fisherfolk happy was necessary because they supplied most of the sailors in his fleet. Looking after such a loyal populace was a necessity and his duty. These people had kept these shores safe for centuries without asking anything in return, and with little to no help. He was certainly not looking forward to expanding the scope of his work by becoming a supplier of ice. But somehow, that was exactly what he'd inevitably become. For a brief moment, he entertained the notion of taking the merchants to task and having them forced to do his bidding, but he abandoned that thought. If I were in their position, I'd also look to maximize profit, Harry thought with a frown. Shrugging his shoulders, he let the merchants to their own vices. He wanted that cutthroat attitude primed for all his merchants engaged in trade with the outside world. He'd have to step in and take care of this on his own. Unfortunately, it meant expanding his own workforce to ensure a separate supply of ice was given to the fishing villages for their needs. After all, he had given them his word that their livelihoods would be protected and improved under his rule. So upon his return to the castle, he abandoned the plans to visit the 3 new islands of Blazewater Bay in favor of transporting ice to the ice houses in the villages. Because of access to cheap ice, the fisherfolk of Sea Dragon Point could sell their hauls to Avalon and beyond without their produce spoiling. At the end of the day, Harry not only managed to make alternate arrangements to keep a steady supply of ice for the fishing villages, but also watched over Alanara's training. His Tyrashi paramour was undoubtedly a gifted student in magic with a natural inclination towards transfiguration of all things. However, being a Valkyrie required so much more than skill in magic, so Harry was not surprised to see Anya and Kyla take Alanara to the task in a training field. Only time would tell whether Alanara has any martial proclivity. So, this is the former stronghold of pirates and slavers. John commented, looking down from the Liberator at the island below. One of the 3 islands, yes, Harry nodded. Have you named it yet? John asked. Not yet. This one is the smallest of the 3 and the hardest to access from the sea. Why? John asked, with a frown. It's surrounded by too many coral reefs for now. We don't have much presence on this island. Corals? You could call it the Coral Island, John suggested. The pirates called it the Lockhold. They kept their treasures hidden on the island. Harry shrugged his shoulders. Treasure? Have you found treasure on the island? John asked excitedly. Some, but not all, Harry admitted. There are many rumors surrounding the caves on the island which remain unexplored. What about the other 2? John asked, looking down on the island as if hoping to see some of the treasure caves from the Liberator. The other 2 islands are larger in size and useful for us to project our fleet's strength in Blazewater Bay and Saltspear. I've seen your plans for the expansion of the fleet. There are a lot of ports and a lot of ships in those plans. Are you sure you need these many ships and ports? Even the richest kingdoms like the Reach and the Westerlands don't have this many ports. John pointed out, the North is larger than any of the southern kingdoms. If we are to protect our shores and dominate the seas, we need these ports and a larger fleet. Harry stared into the vast sea ahead. Besides, do not forget the enemy from beyond the wall. When our attention is turned to the walkers, I don't want to give anyone ideas about stabbing us in the back. Speaking of which, what is happening beyond the wall? Do you have any idea? Are they closing in? John asked a tad fearfully. I do not know, Harry admitted. He had spent a lot of conscious effort not to poke into the dark power stirring beyond the wall, especially after he had used the Resurrection Stone. He had enough experience with dark spirits to know that it was a bad idea to constantly chase after it and keep tabs on it, even if it's from afar. It was one of the reasons why he hadn't even asked Archmaester Marwyn to do the spying in his stead using Valyrian glass candles. The spirit, gods, or whatever they called themselves, thrived on the emotional turmoil of the collective mindscape of humanity. By obsessing over such entities, he'd inevitably open doors for such entities to enter his mindscape. Harry gathered that it was all too easy for a spirit like Balor, the last Fomorian spirit, to worm its way into his mind, especially with this connection to the Hollows. It doesn't matter anyway. We'll be ready when the time comes. Harry shook himself out of such morbid thoughts and patted John's shoulder. You should bring Rob to these visits instead of me. He should be the one to know more about this stuff anyway, John said. Oh, he knows. It was his idea that I bring you here to make sure you know about all of our positions and strongholds in the Sunset Sea, Harry said with a grin. Really? Why? John looked taken aback. Because the future Lord of Moat Cailin, the shield of the Sunset Canal, needs to know what he is guarding if he is to diligently execute his duties afforded to his position. Wait, what? John asked incredulously. Don't tell me you thought we were rebuilding Moat Cailin to leave it unattended. It's yours when it's finished, Jon Stark, Lord of Moat Cailin, Harry said almost casually, enjoying the slacked jaw expression on Jon's face. Magnar, the up-jumped pretender, is here, Ninjam said hurriedly. Styre, the Magnar of then, looked up from the fire he had running. He stared at the man delivering the message with a critical eye. The messenger boy had brown hair, wore gray wool, and carried a lone spear. Is he alone? Styre grunted as he inspected the fish he was smoking over the fire. Seeing that the flesh was not adequately cooked, he held the fish corked to a stick close to the fire again. No, Magnar, there are 5 spearwives with him. Styre scoffed while those sitting around the fire, sharing its warmth, chuckled. They called the upstart who was trying to unite the different clans of the free folk many names, casting aspersions on the character of a man who used women in battle. Unlike their rowdy brethren, the Thenn never sent their women to fight other men. Joel, you told me that Mance and those spearwives of his were a day away. Why do I hear they are in my camp? Styre glared at his second-in-command. I'll have a word with our warg Magnar. The old man has been counting clouds and seems to have lost his mind, Giles said, rubbing the back of his head with a pinched look. Styre shook his head at that. Unfortunately, they lost some of their best wargs when the others attacked their lands. Without the wargs, their ability to read the lands was becoming difficult. It was one of the reasons why the Thenner were wandering from place to place to keep away from the walkers and their enemy clans. Let him come, I'll hear what the man has to say, Styre said eventually. But father, Sigurd started but fell silent when Styre glared at his son. He waited patiently by the fire until Mance Rayder arrived. Styre gave the man a look and saw the former crow was in good shape. The man was tall with brown hair and clear brown eyes. All the black of the Black brothers were gone, and instead the man chose to wear proper wool and fur as befitting his blood. You look more like one of us now, Mance, Styre grunted. Do I now? Since when did the Magnar then start to worry about how I dress? Mance joked. Since I started hearing rumors that you are gathering men and women to your side from different clans, I needed to know there is no crow left in you. I respect you, Styre. Your people are great warriors and honor your word till your last breath. So, I won't waste your time. You know what's out there. No clan or tribe can face this threat alone. We need to unite to face the walkers, Mance appealed. Unite under you, Styre said with a pointed look. What makes you think you can do any better against the walkers than anybody else? I have no such notions that I can best the walkers. Their power is beyond mine or anyone else's understanding. But if we unite, we can breach the wall and seek refuge behind it, away from the walkers. Styre eyed the man for a moment before he broke out into loud laughter. He shook his head as he took a bite from the fish. He savored the taste of cooked flesh on his tongue while his eyes shined with mirth as he stared at Mance Rayder. You mean to become the king beyond the wall and assault the Night's Watch? Styre said with a shake of his head. Bold of you, Mance. I'll give you that. But there is one problem, though. Many have tried in the past, and all of them failed soundly. It'll not be the same this time, Mance said confidently. Oh, what makes you say that, Mance? Styre asked, indulging the man. I have earned the loyalty of the giants. They've pledged their clubs to my cause. Mance said confidently, making Styre stare at the man with wide eyes. The whisperings started in earnest amongst his clan, making Styre frown. That's a bold claim to make, Mance. The giants have not given their allegiance to anyone for centuries, so you'll not think less of me for doubting your word, Styre said, directing a hard look at the man. I don't expect you to take my word so easily. You can find the truth of my claim with your own eyes. You can come with us to our camp and see for yourself. Mance proclaimed boldly. In fact, all then are welcome. Styre eyed Mance drearily as his people whispered amongst themselves about giants and whatnot. He couldn't really fault his people for their loose tongue. If the giants had joined in common cause with Mance Raider, seeking the man's protection would have been only natural. The others had hunted the Thens, and they were forced to leave their ancestral lands for safety. It made sense to seek the protection offered by the giants in their war against the others. But then again, Mance was not seeking a war against the others. The man wanted to cross the wall somehow. Under normal circumstances, Styre wouldn't have entertained Mance Raider this much. But these were not normal circumstances. You have a sharp tongue and a way with the words, Mance. But are you still a crow, or are you one of the free folk? Styre asked as he climbed to his feet, forcing all conversating to an abrupt halt. I'll be only too happy to show you, Mance said calmly, as Styre stared into the man's brown eyes. We fight Mance Raider. If you win, you'll have earned our trust, and we'll see for ourselves whether your claims about the giants are true, Styre offered. That sounds splendid to me, Mance grinned and nodded his head. Styre smirked as his blood sang at the prospect of combat with a worthy foe. He had fought Mance Raider once in the field of battle. He had lost then, but now he was sure he could clinch a victory. The last time we battled, it was for a herd of sheep. I hope you haven't forgotten that steer, Mance said, standing ready with a sword in hand as they made room for the fight to begin. The last time you were lucky as I was injured by an arrow. This time, you won't have that luck. Styre growled, brandishing his weirwood spear with one of its ends covered in heavy bronze. We'll see about that. Mance growled. With a yell, the two warriors rushed at each other for the second time, with the fate of the Then and the free folk at stake.